In the harsh wilderness of the Arizona Territory, 1876, a single gunshot echoed through Palomino Canyon, followed by dozens more. By nightfall, the wagon train heading to Silverdale was nothing but burning wood and silent bodies scattered across the blood-soaked earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Everyone perished in what would later be known as the Palomino Canyon Massacre. Everyone except 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell, who by some miracle of fate had wandered off to follow a butterfly just minutes before the attack. When a Navajo scout named Key Thompson discovered the lone child hiding in the hollow of a dead cottonwood tree, he faced an impossible choice: return her to a settler community that might blame his people for the attack, or take her into the sacred mountains where no white person was permitted to go. This is the extraordinary true story of how two people from worlds meant to destroy each other formed an unbreakable bond that would change the course of history in the American Southwest. Sarah Mitchell never planned to disobey her mother that day. "Stay within sight of the wagons, Sarah Lynn," Martha Mitchell had warned her daughter every morning since they'd left Kansas City 2 months earlier. "The desert holds more dangers than you can imagine." But on that sweltering June afternoon, as the wagon train made its slow procession through Palomino Canyon, Sarah spotted a butterfly with wings the color of sunset, vibrant orange rimmed with deep blue edges that seemed to shimmer like water in the harsh desert light. Without thinking, she slipped away from her assigned chores, following the dancing insect as it fluttered between the spiny arms of saguaro cacti. "I'll just go a little ways," she promised herself, her calloused fingers clutching the small wooden horse her father had carved for her 8th birthday. "Just until it lands." The butterfly led her farther than she intended, over a small ridge, and into a narrow wash lined with mesquite trees. When Sarah finally realized how far she'd wandered, the butterfly had disappeared, and the wagon train was out of sight behind the rocky hillside. That's when she heard the first gunshot. Then came the screams. Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. More gunshots followed, so many she couldn't count them, along with the terrified whinnying of horses and shouts in languages she didn't understand. Despite every instinct telling her to run back, to find her mother and father and 5-year-old brother Thomas, something deeper kept her rooted in place. Her father's words from weeks earlier echoed in her mind: "If there's ever trouble, find a hiding place and stay quiet as a mouse until I come for you." With trembling legs, Sarah scrambled down the embankment and squeezed herself into the hollow base of an ancient cottonwood tree that had been carved out by years of flash floods. She curled into a tight ball, clutching her wooden horse, its smooth edges worn from countless hours of nervous fidgeting. The gunfire continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Then came a new sound, crackling flames and the acrid smell of burning canvas and wood. Still, Sarah didn't move, even as the desert sun dipped below the horizon and the temperature plummeted, as it always did in the high desert. Night fell. The only sounds were the occasional pop of embers and the distant howl of coyotes. Sarah waited for her father to come find her, just as he promised. She waited until her legs cramped and her throat burned with thirst. She waited until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon cast long, frightening shadows across the sandy wash. He never came. By dawn, Sarah's fear had transformed into a numb, hollow feeling. Cautiously, she crawled from her hiding place, her blue calico dress stiff with dust. Her long brown braids had come undone, hair falling in tangled curtains around her dirt-streaked face. She climbed back up the embankment and peered over the ridge. What she saw would haunt her dreams for years to come. The wagon train, 12 wagons, carrying 28 people, heading to the silver boom town of Silverdale, had been completely destroyed. Blackened wagon frames stood like skeletal remains against the landscape. Bodies lay where they had fallen. There was no movement, no survivors calling for help. Sarah sank to her knees, too shocked even for tears. Somewhere in that scene of carnage were her mother, father, and little Thomas. Even at 8 years old, she understood they were gone forever. For hours, she sat paralyzed, unable to comprehend what she should do next. The Kansas City departure point was hundreds of miles behind them. Silverdale, their destination, was still 2 days' journey ahead, according to what she'd overheard her father telling the other men. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Thirst finally drove Sarah to action. She remembered the small creek they'd crossed the previous day. It couldn't be far. She had just started making her way down the ridge when she heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Sarah dropped to her stomach, pressing herself against the hot earth. A man appeared below, moving with the silent grace of a mountain lion as he approached the massacre site. Unlike the other men Sarah had traveled with, this one had copper skin and straight black hair that hung past his shoulders. He wore buckskin leggings and a blue cloth shirt, with a red bandana tied around his forehead. Sarah had heard stories about the native tribes, tales meant to frighten children into obedience. The Indians will snatch disobedient children, her mother would warn. But Sarah's father, who had fought in the Civil War and claimed to have met many tribal people, always shook his head at such talk. Most just want to be left alone to live as they always have, he'd explained one night by the campfire. It's us who keep breaking promises and pushing them from their lands. Now, watching the man examining the wagon train with a grim expression, Sarah wasn't sure what to believe. Was he responsible for the attack? Was he looking for survivors to kill? Or was he simply investigating, as shocked by the carnage as she was? The man knelt beside one of the bodies, turning it carefully. He examined something on the ground, then looked sharply toward the hills, directly at where Sarah lay hidden. Had he seen her? She couldn't tell. He stood and began walking straight toward her position. Sarah scrambled backward, losing her footing on the loose gravel. She tumbled down the backside of the ridge, scraping her arms and legs as she fell. Landing hard at the bottom, she struggled to her feet and started to run, directly into the path of the very man she was trying to escape. He caught her easily, his strong hands gripping her shoulders. Sarah screamed and kicked, dropping her. "Wooden horse in the struggle. Be still, little one," the man said in perfect, albeit accented English. "I will not harm you." Sarah continued to fight until exhaustion overwhelmed her. Only then did she notice that the man had made no move to hurt her. He simply held her at arm's length, waiting for her resistance to subside. "What is your name?" he asked when she finally stilled. Sarah, she stammered. "Sarah Mitchell." He nodded solemnly. "I am Key Thompson. I scout for the U.S. Army at Fort Whipple." Sarah blinked in surprise. This wasn't what she expected. Key released her shoulders, but remained crouched at her level. He retrieved her fallen wooden horse and offered it to her. "You were with those wagons?" he asked. Though it wasn't really a question, she nodded, tears finally breaking through her shock. "My mama and papa and Thomas, they're all—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," Key confirmed, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness that seemed at odds with the stoic set of his jaw. "Everyone is gone. You alone survived. Did you—" Sarah couldn't bring herself to ask if he was responsible. Key seemed to understand her unspoken question. "No! This was not my people's doing. The tracks and bullets tell a different story." He looked back toward the massacre site, his expression hardening. "Bandits. White men pretending to be Diné." "What? You call Navajo to hide their crimes? They have done this before." A canteen appeared in his hand. "Drink," he instructed, slowly. Sarah took the water, Suddenly aware of her parched throat, she sipped cautiously, knowing from desert travel that gulping would only make her sick. "What happens now?" she asked when she'd had enough. Key Thompson stood, scanning the horizon. His face revealed the difficult calculation taking place behind his dark eyes. "I should take you to the fort," he said finally, "or to the mining town at Silverdale." Sarah felt a momentary relief. Civilization, people who looked like her, safety. "But," he continued, his voice growing grave, "but those who did this," he gestured toward the wagons, "will have friends in both places. Some will say the Diné were responsible, no matter what tracks show. Others will want no witnesses." He knelt again, meeting her eyes directly. "And some who should protect you might not, if they learn you saw men with white skin doing this deed." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah felt cold despite the desert heat. "What does that mean?" "It means you are in danger. Sarah Mitchell, from more than just the desert." Key Thompson looked toward the distant peaks of a mountain range that rose like blue shadows against the eastern horizon. "There is another way," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but it would mean taking you where no white child has ever been permitted." "Where?" Sarah asked. "To the sacred mountains of my people, to the heart of Dineta, our homeland." He picked up a handful of dirt, letting it sift through his fingers. "My grandmother is a healer among our people. She would know how to protect you until it is safe." Sarah looked back at the remains of everything she had known. There was nothing left for her here. "Will there be water?" she asked simply. "And food?" For the first time, a hint of a smile touched Key's weathered face. "Yes, little one. The mountains hold what the desert denies, but the journey will not be easy, and you must do exactly as I say." Sarah clutched her wooden horse tightly. "I can do that." Key nodded, his decision apparently made. He unwrapped the red bandana from his forehead and soaked it with water from his canteen. "First, we must hide your trail," he explained, gently, cleaning the dirt from her face. "From this moment, you are no longer Sarah Mitchell of Kansas City." "Then who am I?" she asked. Key considered this as he retired his bandana around her head to shield her from the sun. "For now, you are simply a child under Diné protection," he said. "The mountains will give you your true name when they know you better." With those cryptic words, Key Thompson lifted Sarah onto his back and set off toward the distant mountains, leaving behind the smoldering remains of her past life and unknowingly walking straight into a legend that would one day change the course of relations between two worlds destined to collide. The mountains that had seemed so close from Palomino Canyon proved deceptively distant. For 2 days, Key Thompson and Sarah traveled across the unforgiving terrain, moving only during the cooler hours of early morning and late evening. During the scorching midday heat, they sheltered beneath overhanging rocks or in the sparse shade of juniper trees. Sarah had never known exhaustion like this. Her legs ached with each step, and blisters formed, then burst on her feet despite Key's efforts to pad her worn leather shoes with strips of rabbit fur. Yet she never complained. The horror she had witnessed had aged her beyond her 8 years, instilling a quiet determination that impressed even her stoic companion. "You have the spirit of a mountain sheep," Key observed on the second evening as they shared a small meal of dried meat and wild onions. "Small, but stubborn." Sarah took this as the compliment it was intended to be. "My father always said I was too hard-headed for my own good." At the mention of her father, Sarah's voice caught. It was the first time she had spoken of her family since they'd left the massacre site. Key remained silent, allowing her the space to either continue or retreat back into herself. After a long moment, she asked, "Will I ever see them again?" "After we die, I mean." Key poked at their small smokeless fire with a stick. "My people believe that those who have walked on continue their journey in another world. They do not leave us entirely. They become part of the wind, the rain, the mountains. They watch over us." He looked up at the star-filled sky. "Your people have similar beliefs, do they not?" Sarah nodded. "Mama said good people go to heaven to be with God, but—" She hesitated, her young mind wrestling with theological complexities. "Would your people and my people go to the same place? Reverend Wilkins back in Kansas said only Christians go to heaven." Key's expression remained impassive, but a subtle tension appeared around his eyes. "I believe the Creator has enough wisdom not to divide families in death the way men divide people in life." This seemed to satisfy Sarah, who nodded solemnly and returned to her meager portion of food. As darkness deepened around them, Key pointed to an imposing silhouette against the night sky, the first real mountain of their journey. "Tomorrow we reach the foothills of Jiwigai," he said. "What your maps call White Mountain. Beyond lies Dineta, homeland of the Diné." "Will your people be angry that you're bringing me there?" Sarah asked, remembering his earlier comment about her being where no white child had been permitted. Key's silence told her more than words could have. "Some will," he finally admitted. "Our ways forbid bringing outsiders to certain sacred places, but there are older laws than even those, laws of protection and sanctuary." He stared into the dying embers of their fire. "My grandmother, as Domontwogi, you would say medicine woman who weaves, sits on the council of elders. Her voice carries great weight. She will understand why I could not leave you to die, nor deliver you to those who might wish you harm." Sarah absorbed this information, sensing the risk Key was taking on her behalf. What if she doesn't understand? Key's face remained unreadable as he extinguished the last glowing coal with a handful of sand. "Then we will face that challenge when it comes. Now sleep. Tomorrow's path grows steeper." The next morning it dawned cool and clear. As they prepared to leave their campsite, Key suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Sarah followed his gaze and saw dust rising in the distance, riders approaching from the direction they had come. "Quickly!" Key urged, gathering their few belongings. "We must reach the mountain ravines before they spot us." "Who is it?" Sarah asked, even as she hurried to obey. "Perhaps soldiers. Perhaps those who attacked your wagons returned to hide their trail. Either would bring danger." They moved with renewed urgency, taking advantage of the broken terrain to mask their progress. Several times they heard distant hoofbeats, forcing them to take cover until the sound receded. By midday, they had reached the first granite slopes of the mountain, where the sparse desert vegetation gave way to scattered pines and increased undergrowth. "The horses cannot follow where we now go," Key explained, as he led Sarah up a nearly invisible game trail that wound between massive boulders. "And few white men know these paths." The trail grew increasingly difficult, forcing Sarah to use her hands as much as her feet to climb the steeper sections. Just as her strength was about to give out, they created a ridge, and the landscape before them changed dramatically. A hidden valley spread below, cut between the arms of surrounding mountains. Unlike the arid landscape they had traversed, this sanctuary teemed with life. A creek, fed by mountain springs, wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, while towering pines created islands of shade. Sarah gasped at the unexpected beauty. "It's like a secret garden," she whispered. Key's normally stern expression softened slightly. "This is just the beginning of Dineta's wonders. Our home lies within these mountains, hidden from those who would take it." They descended into the valley, following the creek upstream toward a series of tiered pools where clear water cascaded over smooth stones. Key allowed Sarah to rest and drink while he foraged nearby, returning with a handful of berries and edible roots. "We are now in a place between worlds," he explained as they ate. "Not yet among my people, but beyond the reach of yours. We will rest here tonight and tomorrow cross through the passage to the inner valleys where the Diné make their summer camps." Sarah studied her companion's face, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor now that they had reached familiar territory. Though still vigilant, some of the tension had left his shoulders. "Why did you become a scout for the army?" she asked suddenly. "If your people hide from white men, why work for them?" The question clearly caught Key off guard. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse to answer, but he eventually settled cross-legged beside her, his expression thoughtful. "7 winters ago, the U.S. Army forced many Diné to walk to a place called Hueldi. You know it as Bosque Redondo. Many died on this long walk. My father's sister and her children were among them." Sarah remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. "When those who survived were finally allowed to return to a small portion of our homeland, my father believed we needed to understand the white man's ways to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. He sent me to learn their language, their customs, their thinking." Key picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed, turning it over in his palm. "By working as a scout, I learn which way the soldiers will move next. I see the maps they draw. I hear the plans they make. This knowledge protects my people." "You're a spy," Sarah said with unexpected insight. Key gave her a sharp look, then his expression relaxed into something resembling amusement. "You are cleverer than most children your age, Sarah Mitchell." "My papa said the same thing," she replied, with a hint of pride that quickly faded to sadness. As twilight descended on the valley, Key built a proper fire for the first time since their journey began. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows across the rocks surrounding their small camp. "Tomorrow you will meet my people," he said as he arranged pine boughs into a soft bed for Sarah. "There are things you must understand before then." Sarah sat up straighter, sensing the importance of what was to come. "First, you must never mention that I work for the army. This is known only to the Council of Elders and a few trusted others." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Second, until my grandmother determines what is to be done, you must stay close to me or those I designate to watch over you. There are sacred places where you cannot go." "I understand," Sarah said. "Third," Key continued, his voice growing softer, "you must understand that some will not welcome you. The wounds between our peoples are fresh. Children who have lost parents to soldiers' bullets may not understand why a white child receives shelter while theirs did." "Not!" This harsh reality settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. "Maybe I shouldn't go," she whispered. "Maybe I should try to reach Silverdale on my own." Key shook his head firmly. "The men who attacked your wagon train intended to leave no witnesses. If any recognize that a child was missing, they will be searching. Silverdale would be the first place they would look." He added another branch to the fire. "Besides, the desert would claim you long before you reach the mining town." "Then what will happen to me?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had hovered unspoken between them since he'd found her. Key considered his words carefully before responding. "For now, you will be under the protection of my family, while I report what I found at Palomino Canyon to the army commanders. They must know that bandits are disguising themselves as Diné to commit their crimes." "But you won't tell them about me," Sarah said, understanding now the complexity of his position. "No," Key confirmed. "If the attackers have connections within the fort, as I suspect, revealing your survival would put you in danger. Once I know who can be trusted, perhaps a different path will open." Sarah processed this information, her young mind grappling with implications that would challenge most adults. "How long will I stay with your people?" "That is for the council to decide. With my grandmother's guidance, it may be many moons before it is safe for you to return to your own kind." The reality of her situation finally broke through the protective numbness that had sustained Sarah since the massacre. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She had lost not only her family, but her entire world in the span of 3 days. Key watched her silent crying with a mixture of compassion and awkward uncertainty. Among his people, grief was expressed differently, with ritualized mourning practices that helped channel the pain of loss. This child's quiet tears seemed to call for a response he was ill-equipped to provide. After a moment's hesitation, he reached into a small leather pouch at his waist and withdrew a smooth stone pendant, carved with intricate symbols and suspended on a braided cord. "This belonged to my sister, who walks with the ancestors now," he said, holding it out to Sarah. "She was near your age when a fever took her. Our grandmother made this protective amulet for her journey to the next world, but she did not live to receive it." Sarah stared at the pendant, momentarily distracted from her grief. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her finger over the carved symbols, "but I couldn't take something so important." "You do not take it, I give it freely," Key corrected. "My sister would approve of its purpose now, to guard another child on a difficult journey." With gentle hands, he placed the cord around Sarah's neck. "The symbols represent the 4 sacred mountains that guard the borders of Dinatar. While you wear this, you are under their protection." Sarah clutched the pendant, feeling its subtle warmth against her palm. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now sleep," Key instructed, his momentary softness giving way once more to practical concerns. "Tomorrow's journey requires strength." As Sarah drifted towards sleep on her bed of pine boughs, the enormity of the path ahead weighed on her young shoulders. Yet for the first time since watching that fateful butterfly, she felt something beyond fear and grief, a flicker of curiosity about the hidden world she was about to enter, and the faintest stirring of hope that she might somehow find a place within it. Dawn broke over the mountains in ribbons of gold and rose that reflected off the hanging mists in the valley. Key was already awake, returning from some early morning errand with a handful of eggs nested in his bandana. "Wild turkey," he explained, setting to work building a small cooking fire. "A good sign for our journey." They ate quickly, the warm protein providing welcome nourishment after days of travel. Rations. As Sarah helped extinguish the fire and hide their campsite, she noticed a subtle shift in Key's behavior, a heightened alertness, an occasional glance toward the mountains as if expecting someone. "Are we being followed?" she asked, her own senses now attuned to danger after all they'd experienced. Key shook his head. Not followed, expected. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, a bird call echoed from a nearby ridge, not quite natural, containing a pattern that seemed deliberate. Key immediately responded with a similar call, then turned to Sarah. "Border guards," he explained. "They watch all the approaches to Dineta." Within minutes, 2 men materialized from the surrounding forest with such silence that Sarah gasped in surprise. Both carried bows and wore clothing that blended perfectly with the natural environment. Their black hair was tied back with colorful bands, and their faces bore expressions of careful neutrality as they assessed the unexpected visitor. Key stepped forward and spoke rapidly in the Navajo language. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she recognized when their conversation turned to her by the way all 3 men's eyes shifted in her direction. One of the guards, taller than Key with a jagged scar running along his jawline, stepped closer to examine Sarah. His gaze wasn't hostile, merely intensely curious, as if she were some strange creature he'd never encountered before. "Bilagana Auchini," he said, using words Sarah didn't understand. "She is called Sarah," Key replied in English, apparently for her benefit. "She alone survived the Wagon massacre at Palomino Canyon." The guard switched to heavily accented English. "Why bring her here? Should take to a fort or white settlement." "Those who attacked the wagons were white men disguised as Dine," Key explained. "They may have connections at the fort. The child is not safe among her own people until we know more." The second guard, who had remained silent until now, spoke rapidly in Navajo. His tone conveyed obvious disagreement. Key's response was firm and authoritative. He finished by saying, "I invoke the right of sanctuary under the law of the mountains. I will bring her before Aszomontwogi and the council to decide her fate." The mention of Key's grandmother seemed to settle the matter, though neither guard appeared entirely satisfied. After a brief discussion, the taller man nodded. "We will escort you to summer camps," he told Key, then turned his attention to Sarah. "You stay close. Touch nothing. Speak only when spoken to." Sarah nodded her understanding, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality that she was about to enter. A world few outsiders had ever seen, and even fewer had been welcomed into. As they prepared to leave, Key placed a reassuring hand briefly on Sarah's shoulder. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are under the protection of the mountains now." The path they followed was nearly invisible to Sarah's eyes, yet the guards moved with absolute certainty, leading them higher into the mountain range through passages that sometimes narrowed to barely the width of a person. They traveled for hours, the landscape gradually changing as they ascended, pines giving way to fir and spruce, meadows becoming rockier and dotted with alpine flowers Sarah had never seen before. Just when Sarah thought her legs would carry her no farther, they created a final ridge, and a hidden world opened before them. A broad valley nestled between towering peaks, protected from harsh winds by natural stone walls. Several dozen structures were scattered throughout the valley floor. Some traditional hogans made of logs and earth, others summer shelters of brush and branches. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sounds of daily life, children's laughter, the rhythmic thud of weaving battens, the bleating of sheep, drifted up to where they stood. "Nihikea," said Key softly. "Our homeland." Sarah stared in wonder at the hidden community. From the stories she'd heard around pioneer campfires, she had imagined native dwellings to be primitive and temporary. What she saw instead was a well-established settlement with clear organization and purpose. Gardens, corrals for livestock, a central clearing where several older men sat in discussion. As they descended into the valley, their arrival did not go unnoticed. Activity slowed, then stopped as people turned to observe the newcomers. Children who had been playing a game with carved sticks froze in place. Women at looms or cooking fires straightened, their expressions moving from curiosity to shock as they registered Sarah's presence. A pathway cleared before them as they approached the center of the settlement. Sarah felt dozens of eyes upon her, some merely curious, others openly hostile. She fought the urge to shrink behind Key, remembering his earlier words about mountain sheep being small but stubborn. The guards led them directly to the largest hogan, positioned prominently at the valley's center. Before they could announce their arrival, the dwelling's blanket door was pushed aside, and an elderly woman emerged, her silver hair arranged in the traditional Navajo way, her bearing regal despite her advanced age. One look at her face confirmed her relationship to Key, the same high cheekbones and intense dark eyes, though hers were now framed by deep wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of sun and wind and wisdom. Aszomontwogi, medicine woman who weaves, had been expecting them. Aszomontwogi studied Sarah with eyes that seemed to penetrate straight to her core, assessing not just her appearance, but something deeper, her spirit, her intentions, her very nature. Sarah fought the urge to fidget under that piercing gaze, instead meeting the elder's eyes with quiet dignity that belied her 8 years. A long moment passed before the medicine woman spoke, addressing Key in their native tongue. Their conversation flowed back and forth, sometimes heated, sometimes measured. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she recognized when Key was explaining her presence, defending his decision to bring her here. Finally, Aszomontwogi turned her attention fully to Sarah. "You have traveled far, Bilagana girl," she said in accented but clear English. "And lost much along the way." Sarah nodded, unsure how to address the formidable woman before her. "I am called Tuogi," the elder continued. "My grandson tells me you are Sarah." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, falling back on the manners her mother had instilled in her. Sarah Mitchell. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps approval, crossed Tuogi's weathered features at Sarah's polite response. "Come," she said, gesturing toward Hogan's entrance. "We will speak inside, away from curious ears." Sarah glanced uncertainly at Key, who nodded encouragement. "Go with her. I must speak with the council about what I found at the massacre site." As Key moved toward the group of men gathered in the center of the settlement, Sarah followed Tuogi into the Hogan. The interior was cool and dimly lit, with light filtering through a smoke hole in the center of the domed roof. The packed earth floor was covered with woven rugs in geometric patterns of red, black, and white. Various bundles of herbs hung from the wooden frame, filling the air with unfamiliar but pleasant scents. As Tuogi gestures for Sarah to sit on one of the rugs while she busied herself at a small fire pit, adding herbs to a pot of simmering water. "You must be hungry after your journey," she said, her back to Sarah as she worked. "The mountains demand much from those who cross them." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah admitted, "but your grandson, he made sure I had enough to eat." The elder woman nodded approvingly. "He has always possessed a caretaker's heart, even as a boy." She poured some of the herb-infused water into a clay cup and offered it to Sarah. "Drink. It will restore your strength." Sarah accepted the cup cautiously, inhaling the steam. The aroma reminded her of mint and something else she couldn't identify. She took a tentative sip and found the taste surprisingly pleasant, earthy, and sweet, with a cooling sensation that spread through her tired body. As she drank, Tuogi settled across from her, arranging her long skirts with practiced grace. "Now," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "tell me everything that happened at Palomino Canyon. Leave nothing out, even details that may seem unimportant to you." Sarah took a deep breath and began her story, starting with the butterfly that had lured her away from the wagon train. As she recounted the gunshots, the screams, her night alone in the hollow tree, and Key's discovery of her the next morning, Tuogi listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Sarah described how Key had examined the bodies and declared that the attackers were white men pretending to be Dine, the elder woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you see any of these men?" she asked. "Even a glimpse?" Sarah shook her head. "I was hiding. I only heard them." "And what did you hear? Words? Languages?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall, shouting. "Some words I didn't understand, maybe Spanish? And English too. One man yelled, 'Get the strongbox,' really loud." This detail seemed to interest Tuogi. "Strongbox," she repeated thoughtfully. "Your people were carrying valuables?" "My father said there was a banker in our group taking money to start a new bank in Silverdale," Sarah explained. "And a few families had their savings. Papa kept ours in his boot most of the time." The medicine woman nodded slowly. "So perhaps this was a robbery, not just senseless killing." "But why kill everyone?" Sarah asked the question that had haunted her since that terrible day. "Why not just take the money and leave?" "Because dead people cannot identify their attackers," Tuogi said matter-of-factly, "and because by disguising themselves as Dine, these men ensure that my people will be blamed. When soldiers come to investigate, they will find moccasin tracks and arrows, and come hunting for Navajo raiders who do not exist." The elder woman's directness might have seemed harsh to some, but Sarah appreciated not being treated like a child who needed protection from ugly truths. Her own experiences had already stripped away such innocence. That's why Key didn't want to take me to the fort, Sarah realized aloud. He was afraid they'd either blame your people or— She stopped, a new understanding dawning. Or the real. Attackers might find out I survived. Yes, Aston Twogi confirmed. You are the only witness who knows the truth, that the attackers were not Diné. This makes you both valuable and in danger. She studied Sarah's face intently. Tell me, child, before this happened, what did you know of the Diné, the people your kind called Navajo? Sarah considered the question honestly. Not much, she admitted. Some people on the wagon train said that Indians, native people, were dangerous and would attack settlers. But my father said most tribes just wanted to be left alone on their land. And what do you believe now, after your time with my grandson? I believe my father was right, Sarah answered without hesitation. Key saved my life. He could have left me there or— She swallowed hard. Or killed me to keep me quiet. But he didn't. He brought me somewhere safe. Something shifted in Asjomo. Twogi's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxing of her mouth. And now I must decide if somewhere safe should be here, among the Diné. Before Sarah could respond, the blanket covering the Hogan entrance was pushed aside, and a young girl approximately Sarah's age peered in. She carried a small basket and wore her hair in 2 braids, wrapped with colorful yarn. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Sarah, but she quickly composed herself and addressed Asjomo Twogi in Navajo. The medicine woman responded with what sounded like instructions, and the girl approached, setting the basket beside Sarah. Inside were a corn cake wrapped in a large green leaf, dried berries, and strips of what looked like jerky. My granddaughter Kinwichini, Asjomo Twogi introduced. It means Red House people, her mother's clan. You would find it easier to call her Kina Alda, her everyday name. The girl studied Sarah with unconcealed curiosity, but remained silent. Thank you for the food, Sarah said, addressing Kina Alda directly. The girl looked to her grandmother for translation, then responded with a shy nod, before hurrying back outside, casting one last intrigued glance over her shoulder. Eat. As Asjomo Twogi instructed, we have much to discuss, and the council will expect my decision before sundown. Sarah unwrapped the corn cake, its hearty aroma making her realize how truly hungry she was. As she ate, Asjomo Twogi explained what lay ahead. My grandson must return to the white man's fort tomorrow. His absence for too long would raise suspicion. He will report discovering the massacre, but say nothing of finding you. Sarah nodded her understanding, though the thought of Key leaving filled her with apprehension. While he gathers information about these attackers and whether it is safe for you to return to your people, you must remain here under my protection. Your people allow this? Sarah asked, remembering the less than welcoming expressions she'd encountered upon arrival. Asjomo Twogi's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. What my people will allow is not the question. I am Asjomo Twogi, medicine woman who weaves. My voice carries weight in the council, and in matters of sanctuary, my authority is rarely challenged. She leaned forward slightly. But make no mistake, child. Your presence here breaks ancient taboos. There will be those who oppose it, those who fear what bringing a Bilagana child into our sacred mountains might mean. I don't want to cause trouble, Sarah said earnestly. I can try to leave if— Asjomo Twogi raised a hand, cutting off her words. The path is set. The question now is how you will walk it. The elder rose with surprising agility for her age and moved to a stack of woven blankets in the corner of the Hogan. From beneath them, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in deerskin and brought it back to where Sarah sat. If you are to stay among us, even temporarily, there are conditions, she said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a simple dress made of soft buckskin, decorated with subtle beadwork along the hem. First, you must dress as our children dress. Your Bilagana clothes draw too much attention. Next, she produced a small pouch. Second, we must darken your skin and hair. Your coloring marks you too clearly as an outsider. Sarah touched her light brown braids self-consciously. Will it wash away eventually? Yes, though it will last many weeks. Long enough for us to determine your path forward. Asdamontwogi, set these items aside and fix Sarah with her penetrating gaze once more. Third, and most important, you must learn our ways while you are here, not as a curiosity or a traveler's tale to share when you return to your people, but as knowledge. To be respected, she tapped the pendant around Sarah's neck, the one Key had given her. My grandson has already marked you with protection. He sees something in your spirit worth preserving, just as I do. But others will need convincing. How do I convince them? Sarah asked. By showing them that not all Bilagana are enemies. By learning our language, helping with daily tasks, respecting our customs, Asdamontwogi paused, and by accepting a Dene name for the duration of your stay. Outside, the sounds of the settlement continued, voices calling to one another, the rhythmic thumping of weaving combs, children playing. Normal life continued while Sarah's world transformed completely. I will try my best, she promised solemnly. Asdamontwogi nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then from this day until you return to your people, you will be known as Nijoni Nabahi. What does it mean? Sarah asked. Beautiful warrior, the elder translated. For though you are young, you have already fought battles most children cannot imagine. Before Sarah could respond, the blanket door was pushed aside again, and Key entered, followed by two older men whose stern expressions and decorated clothing suggested importance within the community. One of the men immediately began speaking, rapidly in Navajo, gesturing towards Sarah with obvious disapproval. The second man, older and more reserved, watched silently, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Asdamontwogi listened to the first man's apparent objections without interruption. When he finally paused for breath, she responded with just a few words, spoken softly but with unmistakable authority. The effect was immediate. The protesting man fell silent, though his expression remained stormy. The older silent man nodded once, as if confirming a decision already reached. Key stepped forward. The council has agreed to my grandmother's proposal, he told Sarah. You will stay here under her protection until I can determine whether it is safe for you to return to your people. Some still object, Asdamontwogi added with a glance toward the disgruntled man. Hashtuishni believes bringing a Bilagana child into the sacred mountains invites misfortune. His concerns are not without merit, but tradition demands we offer sanctuary to those in genuine need. The man called Hashtuishni spoke again, this time directing his words at Sarah herself. Though she couldn't understand his language, his tone carried clear warning. He says you must honor our ways while you are here, Key translated. Any disrespect to our customs or sacred places will end your welcome immediately. Sarah nodded solemnly. I understand. I promise to be respectful and learn your ways. When Key translated her response, the older of the two men finally spoke. His voice was deep and measured, his words few. Ashki Chishi says you have the eyes of one who has seen too much death too young, Key explained. He believes this gives you the right to healing, regardless of your birth. With that pronouncement, both men departed, leaving Sarah alone with Key and his grandmother. It is settled then, Asdamontwogi declared. Nijoni Naabahi will remain under my care and instruction, she turned to Key. You must prepare for your return to the fort. I will see to the girl's transformation. Key nodded, then addressed Sarah directly. I must leave before dawn tomorrow. The army will expect my report on the massacre, and any delay would raise suspicion. Will you tell them about me? Sarah asked anxiously. No, Key assured her. As Far as the white world is concerned, all who traveled with that wagon train perished at Palomino Canyon. This will keep you safer until I can discover who was truly responsible." He hesitated, then added, "But I will seek news of any family you might have elsewhere." "You mentioned grandparents in Kansas City?" Sarah shook her head sadly. "They died 2 winters ago. There's just my mother's sister in St. Louis, but we haven't seen her since I was 4. "Nevertheless, I will make inquiries," Key promised. "If there is a family who should know of your survival, we will find a way to inform them once it is safe." With that, he nodded respectfully to his grandmother and departed, leaving Sarah alone with the formidable medicine woman, as Twogi wasted no time. "Come," she instructed, reaching for the buckskin dress. "Your new life begins now." The transformation took longer than Sarah expected. First came a cleansing ritual that involved washing in water infused with herbs and sweet-smelling roots. Twogi explained that this washing away of her old self was necessary before she could properly don the clothing of the Dene. Next came the application of a dark paste to Sarah's skin, a mixture of walnut husks, clay, and other ingredients the elder didn't name. It stained her naturally fair complexion to a warm copper tone that, while not identical to the Navajo children's natural coloring, was close enough to make her less conspicuous at a distance. Her light brown hair received similar treatment, darkened with a different mixture that, as Twogi worked through the strands with practiced hands. "Your eyes we cannot change," the medicine woman remarked, studying Sarah's blue-gray irises. "But if anyone asks, we will say your father came from a distant tribe where such eyes are sometimes seen." Finally, Sarah was dressed in the buckskin garment, which fell to just below her knees. Soft moccasins replaced her worn leather shoes, and her transformed hair was arranged in the traditional style of Navajo girls, wrapped with colorful yarn, similar to what she had seen on Kinaalda. When the process was complete, as Twogi led Sarah to a pool of still water at the edge of the settlement. The girl who stared back at her from the reflection was almost unrecognizable, a stranger with darkened skin and hair, dressed in native garb, only her eyes remaining as a reminder of her true identity. "Now you are Nijoni na Bahi, Asjomon," Twogi declared. "The transformation is only skin deep, but it will allow you to move among us without drawing constant attention." Sarah studied her altered appearance with a mixture of fascination and unease. In less than a week, she had lost her family, her identity, and now, even her appearance. It was as if Sarah Mitchell were truly gone, leaving only this new creation. In her place, "Will I ever be me again?" she asked softly, touching the darkened strands of her hair. As Twogi's expression softened almost imperceptibly, "You are still you, child. The outside changes, but what matters lies within." She tapped Sarah's chest, just above her heart. "This remains unchanged." As they returned to the settlement, the buzzing activity of daily life continued around them. Women worked at outdoor looms or tended cook fires, men crafted tools or repaired structures, children ran errands or played in small groups. Now, however, Sarah noticed a difference in how she was received. Without her obviously white clothing and appearance, the States were less hostile, more curious. A few children even paused in their play to study her with open interest rather than suspicion. Kinaalda, the medicine woman's granddaughter, approached cautiously, carrying a clay water. "Yar." She spoke to her grandmother in Navajo, her eyes never leaving Sarah. "She asks if you are hungry again," as Twogi translated. "The evening meal will begin soon at the central fire." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how the day's events had depleted her energy. "Yes, thank you." When Twogi translated this response, Kinaalda smiled shyly and motioned for Sarah to follow her. "Go," the elder woman instructed. It is time you began learning our ways directly, not just through my words. Kinaalda will show you where to sit and how to behave during the meal." As Sarah followed her new guide toward the center of the settlement, where cooking fires were being stoked for the evening meal, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her, some accepting, others still wary. Her transformation might have altered her appearance, but it had not erased the reality of her situation. She was still an outsider in a closed world, dependent on the goodwill of Azjomon and Ki for her very survival. And tomorrow Ki would depart, leaving her truly alone, among strangers whose language she couldn't speak and whose customs she didn't understand. Yet as she watched Kinaalda confidently navigate the activity around the cooking area, occasionally, glancing back to ensure Sarah still followed, she felt a small spark of something unexpected. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. A sense that even in this utterly foreign world, connections were possible. That night, as Sarah lay on a sleeping mat in the corner of Azjomon hogan, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Navajo settlement preparing for sleep, she clutched the wooden horse carving that remained her only tangible link to her previous life. Tomorrow would bring Ki's departure and the beginning of her immersion into Diné ways. Tonight, she allowed herself one final moment as Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Martha and John, sister to Thomas, before embracing her new identity as Nijoni Nabahi, beautiful warrior. Outside, a flute began to play, its haunting melody drifting through the night air. Azjomon, preparing her own sleeping place across the hogan, noticed Sarah's attentiveness to the music. "Night songs," she explained, "to keep harmony between our people and the world around us, to remind us that even in darkness, beauty can be found." As the gentle notes lulled her towards sleep, Sarah realized that perhaps this, finding beauty in darkness, would be her most important lesson among the people of the sacred mountains. Dawn had barely begun to paint the eastern sky when Sarah felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Opening her eyes, she found Ki kneeling beside her sleeping mat, already dressed for travel. "It is time for me to leave," he said quietly, careful not to wake his grandmother who slept across the hogan. "I wanted to speak with you before I go." Sarah sat up, instantly alert despite the early hour. "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, perhaps longer," Ki replied. "Enough time to report the massacre, hear what the army and settlers believe about it, and make inquiries about the men who might have been responsible." He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something small that glinted in the dim light filtering through the smoke hole. "Take this," he said, pressing a silver coin into her palm. "Keep it hidden, but if danger comes before my return, show it to any soldier. It's marked with my Army Scout identification. They will know you are under my protection." Sarah curled her fingers around the coin, feeling the weight of what it represented, a lifeline back to her own world if necessary. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. Ki nodded, then hesitated before adding, "The path before you will not be easy. My people have suffered much at the hands of the Bilagana. Some will never accept your presence here, no matter how you look or act." "I understand," Sarah said, though in truth the full complexity of her situation was only beginning to dawn on her. "Learn our language," Ki advised. "It will open doors that would otherwise remain closed to you. My grandmother is a demanding teacher, but there is no better one." He glanced toward Azjomon sleeping form. "And Kinaalda, my cousin's daughter, she has a good heart beneath her shyness. Friendship with her would serve you well." With those final words of advice, Ki rose and moved silently toward the entrance. At the doorway, he turned back once. "Remember who you truly are, Sarah Mitchell," he said softly, "even as you become Nijoni Nabahi." Then he was gone, slipping away into the pre-dawn darkness to begin his journey back to the fort and the world beyond the sacred mountains. Sarah returned to her sleeping mat, but found rest impossible. Too many thoughts tumbled through her mind. Worry about Key's safety, uncertainty about her own position here, and beneath it all, the still raw grief for her family that surfaced in quiet moments. She was still awake when Azzomontwogi stirred an hour later. The elder woman seemed unsurprised to find Sarah already alert. "The day begins early among the Diné," she remarked, moving with practiced efficiency to rekindle the small fire in the central pit. "Your training starts now." That first day established a pattern that would define Sarah's new life. Before the sun had fully cleared the eastern mountains, she accompanied Azzomontwogi to a small stream where they collected water in clay vessels. The medicine woman used this opportunity to begin Sarah's language instruction, naming each object they encountered in Navajo and requiring Sarah to repeat until her pronunciation was acceptable. "Tu," Azzomontwogi said, pointing to the flowing water. "Tu," Sarah echoed, trying to match the elder's intonation. "Tse," Azzomontwogi continued, indicating a rock. "Tse," Sarah repeated. This continued as they gathered firewood, tended medicinal plants in Azzomontwogi's garden, and prepared morning food. By midday, Sarah's head swam with new sounds and meanings, but she persisted, understanding that language was her first bridge to acceptance. After the midday meal, which they shared with several older women who examined Sarah with undisguised curiosity, Azzomontwogi led her to a small clearing just beyond the main settlement. There, two upright looms stood in the shade of a juniper tree. Kinalda was already there, her nimble fingers working colored yarn across taut strings. "Weaving is the heart of a Diné woman's knowledge," Azzomontwogi explained as she positioned Sarah before the second, smaller loom. "In creating the patterns passed down through generations, we connect to those who came before and those who will follow." What followed was Sarah's first lesson in an art form far more complex than the simple needlework her mother had begun teaching. The traditional upright loom required not just dexterity, but an understanding of tension, pattern, and balance that challenged Sarah's young mind. Her first attempts were clumsy, drawing occasional smiles from Kinalda. "Do not feel discouraged," Azzomontwogi advised when Sarah's frustration became evident. "Kinalda has been weaving since she could walk. Your hands will learn, as hers did." By late afternoon, Sarah had managed to complete only a small section of the simple pattern Azzomontwogi had set for her. Her back ached from sitting upright for so long, and her fingers were sore from manipulating the unfamiliar tools. "That is enough for today," the medicine woman declared, inspecting Sarah's work with a critical eye. "Tomorrow you will unravel this and begin again. Learning comes from doing, undoing, and redoing." As they prepared to return to the settlement, Kinalda approached Sarah directly for the first time. With gestures and the few Navajo words Sarah had learned that morning, the native girl indicated that Sarah should follow her. Looking to Azzomontwogi for permission, Sarah received a nod of approval. "Go. It is good for you to know others besides me, but return before the evening meal." Sarah followed Kinalda along a narrow path that wound between rocky outcroppings to a small mesa overlooking the valley. There, to Sarah's surprise, several children approximately their age had gathered. They fell silent as the two girls approached, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to wary suspicion. Kinalda spoke rapidly in Navajo, apparently explaining Sarah's presence. One boy, taller than the others with a fierce expression, responded sharply. Whatever he said caused Kinalda to place herself slightly in front of Sarah in what seemed a protective gesture. An older girl with intricate turquoise beads woven into her hair intervened, her tone conciliatory. After a brief discussion, most of the children resumed what they had been doing before, a game involving painted stones, arranged in patterns on the ground. Kina Alda guided Sarah to sit at the edge of the circle, demonstrating through gestures how the game was played. It was similar to jacks or marbles, requiring players to toss a small stone into the air, quickly rearrange the pattern on the ground, and catch the falling stone before it touched earth. Though no one spoke directly to her, Sarah was permitted to observe and eventually to try her hand at the game. She performed poorly at first, drawing some derisive laughter, but improved with each attempt. By the time the lengthening shadows indicated they should return to the settlement, she had won a small measure of grudging respect from the group. As they descended from the mesa, Kina Alda picked a small wildflower and offered it to Sarah with a shy smile, the first genuine gesture of friendship she had received. Though they shared no common language yet, something had shifted between them. That night, Azjomontwogi instructed Sarah to sit beside her during the evening meal. At the central fire, the elder's status ensured that no one openly objected to the disguised outsider's presence, though Sarah felt the weight of scrutiny from many in the gathering. After the meal, several elders remained around the fire, and a man Sarah recognized as Ashki Chishi, the silent member of the council from the previous day, began to speak. Though she couldn't understand his words, the rhythm and cadence suggested he was telling a story. The rapt attention of everyone present confirmed this impression. He tells the creation story, Azjomontwogi whispered, translating key points as the narrative unfolded. How first man and first woman emerged into this world. How the sacred mountains were placed to mark the boundaries of Dineta. How the holy people taught our ancestors to live in beauty and harmony. Sarah listened, entranced not just by the story itself, but by the way Ashki Chishi's voice rose and fell, his hands painting images in the air, his face reflecting the emotions of each part of the tale. This was storytelling as she had never experienced it, not simply words on a page or brief tales told around a campfire, but living history passed from generation to generation. When the gathering dispersed for the night, Azjomontwogi commented, "You listened well. Many Bilagana hear our stories as curious tales only, not as truth and teaching. Remember this story, for it explains why we are as we are." Over the next several days, a routine emerged. Mornings were devoted to language instruction and helping with essential tasks, gathering food, preparing meals, tending to the settlement's needs. Afternoons brought weaving lessons, which gradually expanded to include instruction in beadwork and basket making as well. In the evenings, Sarah was permitted to join Kina Alda and the other children, though many still kept their distance. 7 days after Key's departure, Azjomontwogi announced a change to their routine. "Today you will accompany me to gather medicinal plants," she informed Sarah as they broke their morning fast. "It is time you learned some healing ways." They ventured higher into the mountains than Sarah had yet gone, following game trails that wound through pine forests and open meadows brilliant with wildflowers. At each stop, Azjomontwogi carefully harvested specific plants, explaining their properties and uses. "This one," she said, indicating a low-growing plant with delicate purple flowers, "eases the pain of women's monthly cycles. And this," she pointed to a spiky-leaved bush, "reduces fever and draws infection from wounds." Sarah absorbed the information eagerly, recognizing its practical value regardless of where her future might lead. Her own mother had kept a modest herb garden back in Kansas City, but her knowledge had been limited compared to the comprehensive understanding Azjomontwogi demonstrated. As they worked their way along a sun-dappled ridge, the medicine woman suddenly froze, raising a hand for silence. Sarah instantly complied, having learned to read the elder's signals over the past week. A moment later, she heard what has altered Azjomontwogi, voices coming from the valley below, speaking English. They crept forward cautiously until they could peer down into a small canyon from behind a screen of junipers. Below, a group of 8 men on horseback had paused near a stream. Their appearance immediately identified them as soldiers, blue uniforms, wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across their backs. "Army patrol," as Montwogi whispered unnecessarily. "They rarely venture this high into the mountains. Something must have brought them." As they watched, one man, clearly an officer from his bearing and the respect shown by the others, unfolded a map and gestured toward distant peaks. "Reports of smoke from multiple campfires," they heard him say as his voice carried up the ridge. "Could be nothing. Could be a summer encampment we didn't know about." Another soldier responded, his tone skeptical. "Sir, with respect, we're well beyond the reservation boundaries. If there are Navajo up here, they're in violation of the treaty." The officer refolded his map. "After that massacre at Palomino Canyon, we can't take chances. If there are hostiles in these mountains, we need to know." Sarah felt Montwogi's hand close around her arm like an iron band. "They search for our settlement," the elder breathed, her voice barely audible. "We must warn the others." They retreated with painstaking slowness until they were safely out of earshot of the patrol. Then Montwogi set a pace that challenged even Sarah's young legs as they hurried back toward the hidden valley. "Will they find us?" Sarah asked as they half ran, half walked along a narrow trail. "Not easily," Montwogi replied. "The passages to our valley are well hidden and guarded, but if they are determined and have a skilled tracker—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Sarah understood the danger all too well. If the soldiers discovered the settlement, they would almost certainly force everyone to relocate to the official reservation. And in the process, they would find her, a white child living among the Navajo, looking more native than white due to her disguise. What explanation could possibly satisfy them? Would they believe she had been rescued rather than captured? Would they accept that she stayed willingly, or would her presence provide the very excuse they needed to take action against the community that had sheltered her? These questions tumbled through Sarah's mind as they reached the valley, and Montwogi immediately called the council together. The urgency in the elder woman's voice brought not just the former council members, but many others from throughout the settlement. Standing beside Montwogi, Sarah could understand only portions of the rapid discussion that followed her report of the soldiers' presence. But the response was clear enough: immediate action. Women began dismantling the summer shelters and packing essential belongings. Men organized hunting parties to secure fresh meat for what was evidently to be a journey. Children were set to gathering specific plants and berries that could be carried easily. Kinalda appeared at Sarah's side, gesturing urgently for her to follow. They hurried to Montwogi's hogan, where the native girl began swiftly collecting the medicine woman's herbs and tools, wrapping them carefully in deerskin pouches. Sarah instinctively joined the effort, helping to roll sleeping mats and gather cooking implements. As they worked, she realized Kinalda was actually speaking to her in halting, broken English. "We go," the girl said, gesturing toward the highest peaks visible from the valley. "Higher places. Summer camp no more." Sarah was startled by this unexpected linguistic connection. "You speak English?" Kinalda nodded. "Little words. Learn from trading, don't tell others." She tapped her chest proudly. "I learn quickly." This revelation might have led to a deeper conversation had Montwogi not appeared at that moment, her expression grave. "The council has decided," she informed Sarah. "We must move to the high summer pastures earlier than planned. It is a difficult journey, especially for the very young and very old, but remaining here risks discovery." Sarah nodded her understanding. "Because of me?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Are you leaving because I brought danger?" Montwogi considered the question with characteristic directness. "Not because of you alone," she said, finally. The soldiers would search these mountains regardless because of the Palomino Canyon massacre. But your presence makes discovery more dangerous for all. She placed a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. Do not carry blame that is not yours. The real fault lies with those who attacked your wagon train and with a government that restricts where the Diné may live on their own ancestral lands. The elder woman's gaze sharpened. Now we must prepare you for the journey. The high pastures are colder, the air thinner. And there is something else you should know. We may be gone for many weeks, perhaps months. But Key expects to find us here. When he returns, Sarah pointed out with sudden alarm, how will he know where to look for us? I have sent a messenger to a place where my grandson sometimes stops on his way back from the fort, Azzomontwogi explained. If the spirits favor us, he will receive word of our movement before reaching the empty valley. She began inspecting the items Kinalda had packed, adding and removing things according to some internal calculation of need versus portability. You will need warmer clothing, she noted, and sturdier moccasins for the rocky paths ahead. As Azzomontwogi turned her attention to these practical matters, Sarah caught Kinalda's eye. The native girl offered a small, encouraging smile. Together, she said in her limited English, reaching out to touch Sarah's arm briefly. Not afraid. The simple gesture carried profound meaning, not just sympathy or even friendship, but a recognition of shared circumstance. Both girls faced an uncertain journey ahead. Both had reasons for apprehension, yet neither would face these challenges alone. By nightfall, the settlement had been transformed. Most portable structures had been dismantled, their components either packed for transport or carefully hidden. What couldn't be moved was stored in concealed caches that blended seamlessly with the landscape. Even the most obvious signs of human habitation, fire pits, cleared areas, trampled paths, were being systematically erased by teams of children spreading fresh pine needles and arranging rocks to look naturally placed. If the soldiers find this place, Ashki Chishi explained through Azzomontwogi's translation, they will see only an abandoned camp from seasons past, nothing to suggest recent use. The evening meal was abbreviated, with families eating quickly from their travel. Provisions rather than gathering at the central fire, an atmosphere of tense anticipation hung over the community as final preparations were made for departure at first light. In Azzomontwogi's hogan, one of the few structures still standing, Sarah helped pack the last of their belongings. Her hand brushed against something metal in her small bundle of personal items, the silver identification coin Key had given her. She held it for a moment, considering its significance. Just a few hours ago, it had represented a potential escape route back to the world of white settlers. Now, it felt like a tether to Key himself, the one person who truly connected her past life to her present circumstances. We leave at dawn, Azzomontwogi announced, breaking into Sarah's thoughts. The journey will be challenging, but not beyond your capabilities. The elder settled onto her sleeping mat for the last time in this place. Rest while you can, Nijoni Nabahi. Tomorrow we climb to where eagles nest, and lightning speaks directly to the earth. As Sarah lay down on her own mat, Kinalda appeared in the doorway. She hesitated briefly, then entered and placed something beside Sarah, a small pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. For journey, she explained in her limited English. Keep safe things. Before Sarah could respond, the native girl had slipped back outside, leaving her to examine this unexpected gift. The pouch was finely crafted, with a design that Azzomontwogi had recently taught her represented protection and safe travel. Inside was a single item, a small carved figure of a female mountain sheep, similar to the animal Key had compared her to on their journey to the Navajo settlement. The workmanship was simple but expressive, capturing the animal's characteristic determination and sure-footedness. Sarah carefully placed Key's silver coin inside the pouch alongside the carving, then hung it around her neck alongside the protection amulet he had given her. As she drifted toward sleep, her hand closed around both tokens, tangible reminders that even in this moment of upheaval, she was not entirely alone. Outside, a nightbird called, its voice carrying across the nearly empty valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new landscapes, new adaptations required of her. But tonight, for perhaps the first time since the massacre, Sarah felt something unexpected taking root within her, not just resignation to her fate, but a tentative embrace of it. The journey to the high summer pastures began in the ethereal half-light that precedes dawn. Nearly 60 people, men, women, children, and elders, moved in practice formation up narrow switchback trails that only those born to these mountains could follow with confidence. Heavily laden pack horses and small herds of sheep and goats accompanied them, carefully guided by experienced handlers. Sarah walked beside Twogi, whose age seemed no impediment to maintaining a steady pace up the increasingly steep terrain. Kinaalda moved ahead of them, occasionally glancing back to ensure they followed closely. The morning air held a biting chill that Sarah's buckskin dress and the rabbit fur-lined vest Twogi had provided barely kept at bay. "How far do we go?" Sarah asked, her breath forming misty clouds in the cold mountain air. 2 days' journey, the medicine woman replied. "Perhaps 3, moving with the whole community and the animals. The path grows steeper ahead." She pointed toward an imposing ridge that rose like a wall across their route. "Beyond that lies Tsei Canyon, Dechelli in your tongue. And beyond that, the high pastures where our ancestors have summered since before memory." Sarah studied the formidable landscape ahead with a mixture of apprehension and awe. Nothing in her previous life had prepared her for terrain like this. Sheer cliff faces, narrow passages between towering rocks, trails that seemed to vanish into thin air only to reappear around impossible bends. "Will the soldiers follow us there?" she asked, remembering the patrol they had spotted the previous day. As Twogi's expression remained impassive. "Not easily. Few who are not Diné know the hidden paths through Tsei, but the Bluecoats have Ute and Apache scouts who might. We cannot assume safety, only pray for it." As the sun rose fully above the eastern horizon, its rays illuminated the spectacular scenery through which they journeyed. Massive rock formations in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold towered on all sides. Ancient pictographs adorned protected cliff faces, telling stories that predated even the Navajo's arrival in these lands. "Our ancestors left their marks," as Twogi explained when she noticed Sarah studying one such panel of ancient artwork. "Not my direct ancestors. The ancient ones who lived here before the Diné. We honor their memory by protecting these sacred places." The day's march continued with brief rest periods that barely seemed adequate to Sarah's tired legs. Yet she never complained, determined to prove herself equal to the challenge. Round midday, they paused near a small spring for a more substantial meal and to allow the youngest children and oldest members of the community to recover their strength. Sarah found herself seated with Kinaalda and several other children she recognized from the mesa where they had played the stone game. To her surprise, their attitudes toward her had subtly shifted. Though still reserved, they no longer displayed open suspicion or hostility. One boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, offered her a piece of dried fruit from his own provisions. When Kinaalda translated Sarah's thanks, he nodded solemnly before introducing himself as Tseugai, meaning white rock. "He asks if you are afraid of the high places," Kinaalda translated his subsequent question. Sarah considered this carefully before responding. "Tell him I respect the mountains, but try not to fear them. My father taught me that fear makes difficult things impossible." When Kinaalda relayed this answer, Guy's serious expression gave way to a brief smile of approval. It was a small moment, but significant. The first genuine connection Sarah had made beyond Asjomontwogi and Kina Alda. The respite ended all too quickly, and they resumed their ascent. The afternoon brought them to the most challenging section yet, a narrow trail skirting a sheer drop of several hundred feet. Adults helped the smallest children navigate this treacherous passage, while the pack animals were led one by one with exceptional care. Sarah found herself gripping Kinalda's hand for reassurance as they edged along the precipitous path. The native girl squeezed back, murmuring what sounded like encouragement in Navajo. Despite the language barrier, the support was unmistakable. They would face this danger together. By nightfall, the community had reached a relatively flat area that offered enough space to make camp. Though everyone was exhausted from the day's arduous trek, tasks were distributed efficiently, some gathering firewood, others setting up temporary shelters, still others preparing the evening meal. "We have covered a good distance today," Asjomontwogi announced, as she and Sarah arranged their sleeping area beneath a simple brush shelter. "If tomorrow's pace matches it, we will reach the canyon by sunset." Sarah helped prepare a simple stew of dried meat and foraged greens, practicing the Navajo words for each ingredient as she worked. Her vocabulary had expanded considerably over the past week, though complex conversation remained beyond her abilities. As they ate around small, carefully shielded fires designed to minimize visible smoke, Ishni, the council member, who had most strongly opposed Sarah's presence, approached their group. To Sarah's surprise, he addressed her directly in Navajo, his expression stern but not hostile. Asjomontwogi translated, "He says you have walked well today without complaint where many Bilagana would have faltered. He asks if your feet hurt as badly as your face tries to hide." Sarah couldn't help but smile at the unexpected perceptiveness of the observation. "Yes," she admitted, "but not so badly that I cannot continue tomorrow." When this response was translated, Ishni nodded and extended a small clay pot, filled with a pungent salve. "For blisters," Asjomontwogi explained, "a mixture of pine resin and herbs that heals and strengthens the skin." Sarah accepted the offering with appropriate thanks, recognizing it as more than mere practical assistance. It was an acknowledgement, however grudging, of her effort to integrate with the community. That night, exhaustion overcame even the discomfort of sleeping on hard ground beneath a hastily constructed shelter. Sarah fell into a dreamless sleep almost immediately, wakening only when Asjomontwogi roused her in the pre-dawn darkness. "Today will test even the strongest legs," the elder warned, as they broke their fast with corn cakes and dried berries. "But the path through Tsei offers wonders to those with eyes to see them." The second day's journey proved even more demanding than the first. The trail frequently disappeared altogether, requiring them to scramble across bare rock faces using handholds and footholds that seemed invisible until pointed out by their guides. Several times, the entire procession halted while scouts investigated the safest route forward. By midday, they had reached the rim of Canyon de Chelly. Sarah stood transfixed by the vista that opened before her, a vast chasm carved by ancient waters, its walls adorned with countless layers of red and gold sediment. Far below, a ribbon of green vegetation traced the path of a stream that had sustained life in this arid region for countless generations. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her fatigue. Asjomontwogi nodded in agreement. "Tsei is sacred to Dine. Within its walls lie ancestral dwellings, places of power, and histories written in stone. It is a place where the holy people still walk, for those with eyes to perceive them." The descent into the canyon proved even more challenging than the previous climbs. The trail wound back and forth down the nearly vertical canyon wall, sometimes so narrow that they had to proceed single file, pressing their bodies against the rock face. As they neared the canyon floor, Sarah noticed structures built into the cliff faces, ancient dwellings tucked into natural alcoves high above the valley floor. White House, Asdumartwogi identified one particularly impressive ruin, built by the ancient ones who came before us. We do not disturb such places, for the spirits of those who built them remain. By late afternoon, they had reached the canyon floor, where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade, and the stream offered sweet, cold water to slake their thirst. Here they encountered another surprise. A small group of Navajo already encamped, who greeted their arrival with evident relief. Scouts from other family groups, as Asdumartwogi explained, sent ahead to prepare the high pastures for summer use. They bring news. The news, it seemed, was unwelcome. As the elders gathered to confer with these advanced scouts, Sarah noticed a tension spreading throughout the community. Without understanding the rapid exchanges in Navajo, she could nonetheless sense that something had altered their plans. Kina Alda confirmed this suspicion when she joined Sarah by the stream. "Soldiers," she explained in her limited English, gesturing toward the mountains they had planned to ascend the following day. "Many soldiers, looking for Diné not on reservation." "What will we do?" Sarah asked, alarmed by the implications. If the army had expanded its search, their entire journey might have been for nothing. Kina Alda shrugged, her expression troubled. "Elders decide now. Maybe stay in the canyon. Maybe find a different high place." The council's deliberations continued through the evening meal. Finally, as darkness settled over the canyon, Ashki Chishi addressed the gathered community. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, the decisive tone and purposeful gestures made clear that a new course had been determined. "We will not proceed to the usual summer pastures," Asdumartwogi translated for Sarah afterward. "The army has established a temporary camp too near that location. Instead, we will follow the canyon to its western arm and ascend to different islands, places known only to the oldest among us, unused for many seasons." "Is it safe there?" Sarah asked. The medicine woman's expression grew solemn. "Safe from soldiers, yes. The terrain is too difficult for large groups of mounted men, and few maps show these areas, but the journey will be harder, the destination less hospitable than our usual summer grounds." She studied Sarah's face intently. "The path ahead may prove beyond your experience, Nijoni na Bahi. There is no shame in recognizing one's limits." Sarah bristled slightly at the implied suggestion that she might not be able to continue with the group. "I can manage whatever path the rest of you take," she insisted. "I've come this far." Asdumartwogi nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. "Then prepare yourself. We leave at first light, taking only what is essential. The narrower passages cannot accommodate pack animals." That night, as the community made final preparations for the altered journey, Sarah noticed increased activity. Around the edge of their temporary camp, men armed with bows moved silently into position at strategic points overlooking the canyon floor, while runners were dispatched in various directions. "Precautions," Kinalda explained when she caught Sarah watching these movements, "making a safe path for tomorrow." Despite her exhaustion, Sarah found sleep elusive that night. The canyon walls seemed to amplify every sound: the soft hooting of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the whispered conversations of guards changing positions. Each noise triggered memories of that terrible night in Palomino Canyon when similar sounds had preceded the massacre of her family and everyone she had known. She must have dozed eventually, for the next thing she knew, Kina Alda was gently shaking her awake. The canyon was still shrouded in deep shadow, though a faint lightening of the eastern sky promised dawn's approach. "Come," the native girl urged, helping Sarah gather her few belongings. "We go first, with children and mothers. Men follow, hiding. Our trail. The new strategy became clear as they assembled. The community would travel in smaller, staggered groups, rather than as one large, easily tracked procession. Those most vulnerable would move ahead, while those most capable of defense would protect the rear. Sarah found herself assigned to a group led by an elder woman she recognized as Kinaalda's mother. Aszomontwogi, despite her age, had chosen to remain with the final group, her knowledge of healing arts deemed essential if conflict should arise. "Do not worry for me," the medicine woman told Sarah when she expressed concern about this separation. "Follow Nimasi's guidance without question. She knows these canyons as well as anyone living." With a final adjustment to Sarah's pack and a brief touch to the protection amulet around her neck, Aszomontwogi sent her forward with the first group. They set off as the canyon began to brighten with pre-dawn light, following the stream bed westward. The route proved even more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. Rather than remaining on the relatively flat canyon floor, they frequently ascended side canyons only to descend again, crossed the stream multiple times, and navigated passages so narrow they had to remove their packs and push them ahead before squeezing through themselves. By midday, Sarah's muscles ached with fatigue, unlike anything she had experienced before. Yet a quick glance around their small group revealed that even the youngest children maintained the pace without complaint. Pride and determination kept her moving forward when her body begged to rest. Kinaalda remained close by, occasionally offering assistance at particularly difficult passages or sharing water from her own supply when Sarah's ran low. Though they exchanged a few words, their bond continued to strengthen through shared struggle. Late in the afternoon, they reached a fork in the canyon. Nimasi, their guide, paused to examine marks carved into a boulder. Signs invisible to Sarah, but apparently meaningful to the Navajo woman. After a moment's consideration, she led them into the narrower of the two branches. This new passage twisted sharply between towering walls that blocked much of the day's remaining light. The air grew noticeably cooler, and the stream that had accompanied their journey disappeared underground, leaving only a dry, rocky bed. Just as Sarah began to wonder how much farther they could travel before darkness made progress impossible, the canyon opened suddenly into a hidden valley. Unlike the broader expanse of Canyon de Chelly, this secluded basin was completely encircled by steep walls that created a natural fortress. A small spring bubbled from the base of the northern cliff, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by lush vegetation. Tsegahudzani, Kinaalda named the place in a reverent whisper, "Window Rock, sacred place." As Sarah took in their surroundings, she noticed features that explained the name. Near the top of the eastern wall, erosion had created a perfect arch through the solid stone, forming a window that framed the sky beyond. Nimasi directed the group to establish camp near the spring while they awaited the arrival of the other parties. Temporary shelters were erected, a small fire pit dug, and foraging parties dispatched to gather edible plants that grew in abundance around the water source. By nightfall, 2 more groups had joined them in the hidden valley, but there was still no sign of the final party that included Aszomontwogi and many of the council members. As darkness deepened, Sarah found herself growing increasingly anxious about their absence. Kinaalda shared these concerns. "Should be here now," she said, in her limited English as they sat beside the carefully shielded fire. "Too long on trail." Nimasi and several other adults conferred in low voices, their expressions grave. Eventually, a decision was reached. 2 men would backtrack along their route to search for the missing group, while everyone else would remain in the valley and prepare for an extended stay. "What if soldiers found them?" Sarah asked Kinaalda, voicing her deepest fear. The native girl shook her head firmly. "Grandmother is too clever. Maybe I took a different path, maybe hiding from something." Despite these reassurances, an atmosphere of tension pervaded the camp that night. Additional guards were posted, and the children were instructed to remain close to the central area. Sarah's sleep was fitful, interrupted by both physical discomfort and persistent worry about Asjomon Twogi's safety. Dawn brought welcome news. One of the scouts had returned with word that the final group was intact, but had been forced to take a circuitous route to avoid a cavalry patrol that had entered the canyon system. They would arrive by midday. Relief swept through the community. Preparations for their arrival accelerated, with better shelters constructed and additional food gathered. Sarah threw herself into these tasks alongside Kina Alda, finding that physical activity helped dispel her lingering anxiety. True to the scouts' prediction, Asjomon Twogi's group appeared shortly after the sun had reached its zenith. They looked exhausted. Their journey had clearly been arduous, but all had arrived safely. The medicine woman herself showed no sign of fatigue as she strode into the camp, immediately gathering the elders to share information. Sarah waited patiently for an opportunity to approach her mentor, helping distribute water and food to the new arrivals in the meantime. When Asjomon Twogi finally emerged from the council meeting, her expression was more serious than Sarah had yet seen it. "The situation has grown more complex," she informed Sarah bluntly. "The army is conducting a systematic sweep of the entire region with more soldiers than we anticipated. They carry written orders mentioning the Palomino Canyon Massacre specifically." Sarah absorbed this troubling news. "Are they looking for those responsible, or just assuming it was Navajo?" "The orders we glimpsed suggest the latter," Asjomon Twogi replied, though some officers apparently questioned the evidence. She sank down onto a flat rock, the first sign of physical limitation Sarah had observed in the elder. "We intercepted a message meant for the commander at Fort Whipple. It spoke of a reliable witness who identified Navajo raiders at Palomino Canyon. But that's a lie," Sarah exclaimed. "There were no survivors except me, and I told Key the attackers were white men disguised as natives." Asjomon Twogi nodded grimly, "which suggests someone is deliberately falsifying evidence to blame my people, perhaps the same ones who committed the massacre." The implications were staggering. If someone was actively working to frame the Navajo for the attack, someone with enough influence to be considered a reliable witness by the army, then the danger to both the Diné community and to Sarah herself was far greater than they had initially believed. "What about Key?" Sarah asked, sudden fear clutching at her heart. "If he's returning to find us with information about the real attackers, he may walk into grave danger," Asjomon Twogi confirmed. "I have sent another message to the meeting place, but there is no certainty he will find my grandson." Before Key reaches the empty settlement, she gazed up at the stone arch high above them. "For now, we are safe in Tsegahudzani. A few outside the Diné know of this place, and those who do respect its sacred nature. We will remain here while we gather more information and determine our next steps." As darkness fell over the hidden valley, Sarah sat with Kina Alda near the spring, watching stars appear in the rectangle of sky visible through the stone window. Despite the beauty of their sanctuary, she couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. Somewhere beyond these protective canyon walls, forces were aligning against both her newfound community and the only person who connected her to her previous life. The sanctuary they had found might prove temporary indeed if those forces discovered their location. Yet as she looked around at the resilient people who had accepted her, however reluctantly, into their midst, Sarah felt a strange new emotion taking root alongside her fear. It wasn't quite hope, not with so many threats looming. Rather, it was a quiet determination that echoed the steadfast spirit of the Diné themselves, a resolve to face whatever came next, not as a helpless victim, but as Nijoni Nabahi, the beautiful warrior they had named her. Life in the hidden. Valley of Chegahudzani quickly settled into a rhythm dictated by necessity and caution. The Diné were accustomed to adapting to challenging circumstances, and within days the rocky enclosure had been transformed into a functional temporary settlement. Brush shelters were reinforced with stone foundations to withstand the unpredictable mountain weather. The small spring was carefully channeled to create both a drinking source and a separate area for washing. Food-gathering parties ventured out regularly, always returning before nightfall with whatever sustenance the sparse landscape offered. For Sarah, these days brought an acceleration of her education in Navajo ways. With the immediate pressure of travel behind them, Azzomontuogi resumed formal language instruction, pushing Sarah to master more complex vocabulary and sentence structures. The elder was a demanding teacher, but Sarah's aptitude surprised even herself. Perhaps it was the constant immersion, or perhaps the stakes involved, but Navajo words and patterns began to lodge in her memory with increasing ease. "Your tongue learns quickly for a Bilagana," Azzomontuogi commented 2 weeks into their stay at Window Rock. "Soon you will dream in our language." That prediction came true just 3 nights later, when Sarah awakened from a vivid dream in which she had been conversing entirely in Navajo with her deceased brother Thomas. The experience left her shaken, not just because of the seamless language transition, but because it marked another step away from her former identity. Who was she becoming? Some days, when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the spring's still waters, she barely recognized the copper-skinned, dark-haired girl who stared back at her. The walnut dye on her skin needed periodic renewal, but even without it, weeks of sun exposure had darkened her naturally fair complexion. Her movements, speech patterns, even her thinking had begun to shift in subtle ways. Kinalda noted these changes with approval. "You become like Diné girl," she observed one afternoon as they gathered piñon nuts together on the valley's western slope. Their friendship had deepened through shared responsibilities and the gradual erosion of language barriers. "Not completely," Sarah responded in halting Navajo. "Inside still, Sarah." Kinaalda considered this thoughtfully. "Two spirits in one body," she suggested eventually. "Like medicine people sometimes have, Sarah and Nijoni Nabahi together." This concept, that she might integrate both identities rather than replacing one with the other, provided unexpected comfort. Sarah wasn't erasing herself by adapting to Navajo ways. She was expanding, becoming something more complex than before. As their 3rd week in Window Rock began, a sense of restlessness spread throughout the community. The scouts who regularly patrolled the canyon approaches had reported no sign of pursuit, but neither had there been any word from Key or the messengers sent to intercept him. "How much longer will we wait here?" Sarah asked Azzomontuogi as they sorted medicinal herbs one morning. The elder's face revealed nothing of her own concerns. "Until it is safe to move, or until necessity forces us. The summer is still young yet, but this place cannot sustain us indefinitely. The hunting grows poorer each day, and the gathered plants will soon be exhausted." Before Sarah could press for more details, a commotion at the valley's narrow entrance drew their attention. One of the scouts had returned earlier than expected, and from his rapid gestures and the reactions of those around him, he clearly brought significant news. Azzomontuogi rose immediately and hurried toward the gathering crowd, Sarah close behind. The scout's report was delivered in such rapid Navajo that Sarah caught only fragments, rider, alone, approaching. But the electric tension that spread through the community needed no translation. "Someone comes." Kinalda appeared at Sarah's side, her expression taut with excitement and apprehension. "One man on foot following our old trail." "Key?" Sarah asked, hope surging within her. "Maybe," Kinalda replied cautiously. "Or maybe a soldier scout. Elders send warriors to see." The next hour passed with excruciating slowness. The community's routine ground to a halt as everyone awaited the identification of the mysterious visitor. Children were gathered into the central area, and those with weapons positioned themselves at strategic points around the valley's perimeter. Finally, a distinctive bird call, the signal established for "friend," echoed from the canyon entrance. Moments later, a small party emerged from the narrow passage, surrounding a single figure that Sarah instantly recognized despite his trail-worn appearance. "Key!" she cried out, restraining herself from running to him only with great effort. The scout looked exhausted, his clothing dusty and torn, his face leaner than when he had departed nearly a month earlier. Yet his eyes were alert, scanning the gathered community until they found Sarah. He acknowledged her with a brief nod before being escorted directly to the Elders' Council area. "We must wait," Montwogi instructed, noting Sarah's impatience. "His news is for the council first, then we will hear what concerns us." The council's discussion with Key continued for what seemed an eternity. From the serious expressions and occasional raised voices, the news was clearly significant and potentially troubling. Sarah occupied herself by helping prepare a substantial meal for the returned scout, assuming he had traveled far with little sustenance. When Key finally emerged from the council meeting, he accepted the offered food with gratitude, but insisted on speaking with Sarah and Montwogi immediately, even as he ate. "The situation has grown more dangerous than we anticipated," he began without preamble as they settled beside a small fire. "The army is convinced that Navajo raiders were responsible for the Palomino Canyon massacre. They've expanded patrols throughout the region and are threatening to force all Diné back to the reservation, even those with special permissions to remain outside its boundaries." "How did you find us?" Sarah asked. "Did you receive the messenger's warning?" Key shook his head. "I reached our previous settlement and found it abandoned. The signs showed a hasty departure, which concerned me. I backtracked carefully until I encountered one of our border guards who had been watching for me. He guided me to Canyon de Shelley, where another scout directed me here." He turned to his grandmother. "You chose well in coming to Tsegahudzani. The soldiers have searched much of our traditional territory, but they consider these particular canyons too difficult and remote to justify exploration. For now," Montwogi qualified, "their persistence may eventually lead them even here." Key acknowledged this with a grim nod before focusing his attention on Sarah. "You have changed," he observed, studying her darkened complexion and native clothing. "The transformation is convincing, especially at a distance." "I have learned much in your absence," Sarah replied in Navajo, earning a surprised lift of Key's eyebrows. "Her tongue learns quickly," Montwogi confirmed with a hint of pride, "and her spirit adapts well to our ways." Key seemed pleased by this report, but his expression soon darkened again. "I discovered who has been falsifying evidence against our people," he said, his voice lowering. "There is a man in Silverdale, a banker named Harrison Wells, who has been providing sworn statements to the army that he witnessed Navajo raiders attacking the wagon train." Sarah frowned in confusion. "But that's impossible. There was no banker traveling with us. The banker was supposed to meet us in Silverdale to help establish the new bank." "Exactly," Key confirmed. "Wells was already in Silverdale awaiting the arrival of funds and personnel from the east. Yet he now claims he was traveling with the wagon train, was wounded during the attack, and barely escaped with his life." "But why would he lie about such a thing?" Sarah asked, struggling to make sense of this development, as Montwogi's weathered face revealed no surprise. "For the oldest of reasons, greed. The strongbox you mentioned contained bank funds, did it not?" Sarah nodded, slowly as understanding dawned. The banker who was traveling with us, Mr. Ellsworth, had documents and money to establish a branch of his family's bank in Silverdale. He mentioned competition with another banker already there. Harrison Wells, Key confirmed, who stood to lose his monopoly on Silverdale's banking business if a rival established a foothold. With Ellsworth dead and the documents and funds missing, Wells keeps his monopoly, Sarah concluded, but that doesn't explain why he would blame the Navajo specifically. Key's expression hardened. Because Wells is also the primary investor in a mining operation seeking access to silver deposits rumored to exist within Diné lands. If the army uses the massacre as justification to force all Navajo onto the reservation, those lands become available for mining claims. The full scope of the conspiracy unfolded in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. Wells and his associates had orchestrated the massacre not just to eliminate banking competition, but to manipulate the army into clearing native people from land they coveted for mining. This Harrison Wells, he was one of the attackers, she asked. Perhaps, though I doubt a banker would dirty his own hands, Key replied. More likely he hired men to do the actual killing, then fabricated his story of survival to direct blame toward the Diné. We must tell the army the truth, Sarah exclaimed. I'm a witness. I can testify that the attackers were white men disguised as natives. Azomontwogi placed a restraining hand on Sarah's arm. Consider carefully, child. Your testimony against a respected white businessman would carry little weight. Without evidence beyond your word, many would simply assume you had been held captive so long that you began to sympathize with your captors. My grandmother speaks wisely, Key agreed. Wells has established his version of events as truth, in the minds of both the military and the territorial authorities. Challenging that narrative would place you in grave danger, not just from Wells and his associates, but potentially from settlers seeking vengeance for the massacre. Then what can we do? Sarah asked, frustration evident in her voice. Simply allow this man to profit from murdering my family and framing your people? No, Key said firmly, but we must proceed with caution and gather evidence that even the most prejudiced white authority cannot dismiss. He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew a folded document. I managed to obtain a copy of Wells's sworn statement describing the attack. It contains specific details about the raiders and the events, details we can potentially disprove. Azomontwogi studied her grandson with evident concern. You risk much by involving yourself in this matter. Your position as a scout would be forfeit if your true allegiances were discovered. My position means nothing if my people suffer because of these lies, Key responded. Besides, there is more at stake than just Diné's interests. He turned to Sarah. While at Fort Whipple, I made discreet inquiries about your aunt in St. Louis. It was difficult without revealing your survival, but I learned she still lives there. If we can expose Wells and clear the way for your safe return to white society, you have a family who might take you in. This news, the first connection to her previous life since the massacre, hit Sarah with unexpected force. An aunt in St. Louis, someone who shared her blood, who had known her parents and brother. The possibility of returning to a semblance of her former life suddenly became concrete rather than theoretical. Yet surprisingly, the prospect brought as much uncertainty as comfort. After weeks of immersion in Navajo culture, the thought of returning to white society seemed almost as foreign as the Diné ways had initially appeared. What are you thinking, Nijoni Nabahi? Azomontwogi asked gently, using Sarah's Navajo name. Sarah struggled to articulate her conflicted feelings. I don't know, she finally admitted. A month ago, I would have given anything to return to my own people. But now you walk between two worlds, the medicine woman observed, and neither feels entirely yours. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion near the valley entrance drew their attention. One of the perimeter guards was approaching rapidly, his expression urgent. He spoke quickly to Key in Navajo, too rapidly for Sarah to follow completely. "Riders approaching the lower canyon," Key translated grimly. "A large party, at least 20 men. Their tracks suggest army horses." Anxiety rippled through the gathering as word spread. 20 mounted soldiers could mean only one thing: their sanctuary had been discovered. "How did they find this place?" Sarah asked, alarm evident in her voice. "It hardly matters now," as Zomontwogi replied, already rising to assist with emergency preparations. "What matters is how we respond." Key conferred briefly with several warriors before addressing the growing circle of concerned faces. "They cannot reach us quickly. The passages are too narrow for horses beyond the lower canyon. This gives us some advantages. We must decide quickly whether to flee deeper into the mountains or to stand our ground here." Ashkichishi, the elder who had supported Sarah's presence from the beginning, spoke up. "We cannot outrun mounted soldiers with children and elders, especially with limited provisions. And there are few places beyond here that offer both shelter and water. Then we prepare to defend," Hashwishni declared, the former skeptic now fully committed to the community's survival. "The approach is narrow. A few warriors could hold it against many soldiers." Key shook his head firmly. "Fighting the army directly would only reinforce their belief that we are hostile. Even if we succeeded temporarily, they would return with greater numbers." "What alternative do we have?" someone called out. "Surrender? Allow ourselves to be herded back to Hueldi like sheep?" A tense silence fell over the gathering as the impossible choice loomed before them. Fight and risk devastating consequences, or surrender and lose their freedom? It was Sarah who broke the silence, stepping forward with a determination that surprised even herself. "There is another way," she said, her young voice steady in the stillness. "One that requires neither fighting or fleeing." All eyes turned to her, some curious, others skeptical, a few hopeful. "I will go to them," she continued, "as Sarah Mitchell, not as Nijoni Naabahi. I will tell them the truth about the massacre and about Harrison Wells." Protests erupted immediately. "They will never believe a child. Wells' influence is too great. They will think you bewitched by captivity." Key raised a hand for silence. "Let her finish." Sarah took a deep breath. "I have proof that Wells is lying. He claims to have been with our wagon train, but I knew everyone who traveled with us. There was no Harrison Wells among them." She turned to Key. "You said his statement contains specific details about the attack. What kinds of details?" Key consulted the document. "He describes the wagon's arrangement, the time of day, the number of raiders." "Does he mention where the attack happened?" Sarah interrupted. "Yes. He states it occurred at Palomino Canyon as the train made camp for the evening." "Then he's already made a crucial mistake," Sarah declared with growing confidence. "The attack didn't happen while we were making camp. It happened in mid-afternoon while we were still traveling through the canyon. I know because I had wandered off following a butterfly, and my mother had just called me back to help with my chores before we stopped for the day." Key's eyes widened slightly as he grasped the significance of this discrepancy. "A true witness would know the correct time." "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "And I can probably find other inconsistencies in his statement, details that a real survivor would know, but that he could only guess at." As Zomontwogi regarded her with a mixture of pride and concern. "What you propose requires great courage, child. To walk into the soldiers' camp alone, to reveal yourself as a survivor when those who murdered your family may still seek to eliminate witnesses." "I won't go unprepared," Sarah replied, "and I won't go alone." She looked at Key. "You're a scout for the army. You can accompany me. Make them listen." Key exchanged a long look with his grandmother before responding. "It could work," he admitted, "but the risk is substantial to both of us." "We're already at risk," Sarah pointed out pragmatically, "and so is everyone here. At least this way, We choose the battlefield." A thoughtful silence fell over the gathering. As the Diné considered this unexpected strategy from the young Bilagaana girl they had reluctantly sheltered. "The child speaks with wisdom beyond her years," Ashkichishi observed finally, "and with courage worthy of the name Nijoni Nabahi." Gradually, a consensus formed around Sarah's proposal, though not without continued expressions of concern and suggestions for precautions. By nightfall, a plan had been formulated. Key would escort Sarah to the army patrol, presenting her as a survivor he had discovered while scouting the massacre site. Together, they would reveal enough of the truth to cast doubt on Wells' testimony without exposing the Navajo community's location or involvement. As preparations began for their departure at dawn, Kinalda found Sarah sitting alone near the spring, lost in thought. "You leave tomorrow?" the native girl said in her improving English, settling beside her friend. Sarah nodded, unable to fully articulate the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. Fear about the dangerous gambit ahead, uncertainty about her future regardless of the outcome, and an unexpected sense of loss at the prospect of leaving the community that had become her temporary home. "I may not come back," she admitted softly. "If things go well, I might need to go to Silverdale, or even to St. Louis eventually." Kinalda's face revealed a similar conflict. After a moment, she reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something wrapped in a scrap of soft buckskin. "For journey," she said, echoing her words from weeks earlier when she had given Sarah the carved mountain sheep. "For remembering." Inside, the wrapping was a delicate bracelet woven from horsehair and adorned with tiny blue beads. The pattern incorporated the same protection symbols that decorated the pouch Kinalda had previously given her. "I make it while you sleep," Kinalda explained as she tied it around Sarah's wrist. "Blue beads for the sky path, for safe return." "Return to where?" Sarah asked, genuinely uncertain of the answer. Kinalda touched her own heart, then reached out to touch Sarah's. "To wherever this belongs." As stars appeared in the rectangular frame of the stone window high above them, the two girls sat in companionable silence, each contemplating the uncertain paths that stretched before them. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new choices, new possibilities for both tragedy and redemption. For tonight, however, Sarah allowed herself to simply exist in this moment of fragile peace, wearing the symbols of both her worlds. Key's protection, amulet around her neck, Kinalda's bracelet around her wrist, and the silver identification coin hidden safely within her pouch. Together, they formed a bridge between Sarah Mitchell and Nijoni Naabahi, between past and future, between loss and possibility, and for the first time since watching that fateful butterfly in Palomino Canyon, she felt something that resembled hope. Dawn broke cold and clear over Tsegahudzani as Sarah prepared for departure. Adjon Twogi supervised the removal of the walnut dye from her skin and hair, a process that proved more difficult than its application. After nearly an hour of scrubbing with sand, special plant extracts, and cold spring water, Sarah's natural coloring began to emerge. Her hair remained darker than its original light brown, but her skin gradually returned to its fair complexion, though now sun-bronzed from weeks in the open. "The outer change reverses," Astomontwogi observed, as she helped Sarah dress in a simple garment, fashioned from parts of her original clothing, combined with less obvious Navajo elements. "But the inner knowledge remains." The medicine woman placed her weathered hands on Sarah's shoulders, studying her face intently. "Remember who you are, child. Both Sarah Mitchell and Nijoni Nabahi, both are true. Both have power." With these words, she pressed a small leather pouch into Sarah's hand. "Medicine for protection. Keep it close." Key approached, dressed, once again in his scout uniform rather than traditional Navajo attire. The transformation was striking. In these clothes, with his hair tied back severely, he projected an entirely different persona than the man who had guided her through the desert weeks earlier. "Are you ready?" he asked, his expression betraying none of the apprehension they both felt. Sarah nodded, clutching the small bundle containing her few possessions: the wooden horse carved by her father, the mountain sheep figurine from Kinalda, his silver identification coin, and now Asdzumun Twogi's medicine pouch. Around her wrist, the horsehair bracelet remained in place, its blue beads catching the morning light. A small gathering had assembled to witness their departure. Even Hashwishni, who had initially opposed Sarah's presence so vehemently, offered a gruff blessing for their journey. Kina Alda stood slightly apart, her eyes bright with unshed tears. At the last moment, she rushed forward and embraced Sarah, fiercely. "Come back," she whispered, her limited English carrying the weight of a much longer sentiment. "I'll try," Sarah promised, returning the embrace. Then it was time. With a final glance at the hidden valley that had sheltered her, the stone window framing the brightening sky, the spring's clear waters reflecting morning light, the faces of those who had gradually accepted her into their midst, Sarah followed Key into the narrow passage that led back to the wider canyon system. They traveled swiftly and silently, Key setting a pace that challenged Sarah's endurance. By midday, they had navigated the most difficult sections of Canyon de Chelly and emerged onto the more accessible trails that army patrols might feasibly navigate. "From here, we follow their tracks," Key explained, indicating hoofprints in the sandy soil. "Remember our story. I found you hiding near the massacre site while scouting ahead of the main patrol. You've been surviving alone, afraid to seek help because you feared the attackers might return." Sarah nodded, mentally rehearsing the careful blend of truth and omission they had constructed. "And I only recently learned about Harrison Wells, claiming to have been with our wagon train." "Exactly," Key confirmed. "Express surprise at this information. Your genuine reaction will be our strongest evidence." They continued at a more measured pace, following the cavalry tracks deeper into the canyon. As they rounded a bend in the narrowing passage, the distant sound of voices and the whickering of horses announced their approach to the army camp. Key straightened his posture, assuming fully the role of military scout. "Stay close," he instructed. "Let me speak first." The sentry spotted them almost immediately. "Halt, identify yourself." "Scout Thompson returning from reconnaissance," Key called back, his voice carrying the clipped cadence of military speech. "I've found a survivor from the Palomino Canyon Massacre." This announcement created immediate commotion. Within moments, they were surrounded by soldiers whose expressions ranged from suspicious to astonished as they regarded the young girl accompanying their Native American scout. A tall officer with a captain's insignia pushed through the gathering. "Thompson, what's the meaning of this?" "Captain Davis," Key acknowledged with a respectful nod. "While scouting the northern canyons as ordered, I discovered this child. She identifies herself as Sarah Mitchell, survivor of the wagon train attack at Palomino Canyon." All eyes turned to Sarah, who forced herself to appear appropriately overwhelmed and frightened by the sudden attention. It wasn't difficult to feign. The circle of armed men looming over her triggered genuine anxiety. "Captain." Davis crouched to her level, his stern features softening slightly. "Is this true, child? You survived the Palomino Canyon massacre?" Sarah nodded, allowing her voice to waver. "Yes, sir. I wandered off just before the attack. When I heard shooting, I hid in a hollow tree. I've been hiding and moving around ever since, scared they'd come back for me." The captain studied her closely. "That was nearly 2 months ago. How did you survive all this time?" "My father taught me some things about finding food and water," Sarah explained, drawing on the carefully prepared narrative. "And I found supplies in the wagons after everyone was gone." Captain Davis exchanged a significant look with his lieutenant before turning back to Sarah. "Do you know who attacked your wagon train?" This was the crucial moment. Sarah took a deep breath. "They were white men, sir. Some were wearing parts of Indian clothes, but they spoke English to each." I heard them clearly." A murmur ran through the gathered soldiers. The captain's expression remained neutral, though his eyes sharpened with interest. "That contradicts our information," he said carefully. "We have testimony from another survivor, a Mr. Harrison Wells, who identified the attackers as Navajo raiders." Sarah allowed her genuine surprise and indignation to show. "Harrison Wells? There wasn't any Harrison Wells with our wagon train. I knew everyone who traveled with us from Kansas City. Mr. Ellsworth was the banker coming to start a new bank in Silverdale, not Mr. Wells." This declaration created exactly the stir they had hoped for. The captain rose to his full height, signaling to his lieutenant, "Take the girl to my tent, get her food and water." To Key he added, "You too, Thompson. I want a full report." Within the relative privacy of the commander's tent, Sarah repeated her story in greater detail, highlighting the discrepancies between her accurate recollections and Wells's fabricated account. Key contributed his observations from investigating the massacre site, evidence that supported Sarah's version of events rather than the banker's. "The tracks I found showed men in boots, not moccasins," he explained, "and the attack pattern was inconsistent with Navajo raiding tactics." Captain Davis listened intently, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to disturbed contemplation. "These are serious allegations against a prominent citizen," he said finally, "yet the inconsistencies are troubling." He studied Sarah with unexpected compassion. "You've endured a terrible ordeal, Miss Mitchell. Rest assured, we will investigate this matter thoroughly." "What happens now, sir?" Sarah asked, the question carrying more weight than the captain could possibly understand. "Now," he replied, "we escort you to Silverdale, where you'll be placed in proper care while we sort this out." With a significant look toward Key, he added, "And we recall our patrols from these canyons. If what you've told us is accurate, we've been misdirected in our search." By sundown, preparations were complete for the morning journey to Silverdale. Sarah had been provided with clean clothing, proper food, and a tent of her own, courtesies that felt strangely foreign after weeks of Navajo living. As the camp settled for the night, Key found a moment to speak with her privately under the pretext of checking on her welfare. "You did well," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "The captain has already dispatched a messenger to Fort Whipple questioning Wells's account." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "Perhaps not by itself," Key admitted. "But it has created doubt where before there was certainty, and doubt can be a powerful ally when pursuing truth." He glanced toward the canyon walls rising dark against the night sky. "My people are safe for now. The patrols will withdraw while this new information is investigated." Sarah toyed with the horsehair bracelet around her wrist. "Will I see them again? Kinalda, your grandmother?" Key's expression softened. "The path ahead is unclear, but not all paths are straight. They may bend back upon themselves in ways we cannot foresee." He straightened, resuming his military bearing as a soldier approached. "Rest well, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow brings a new chapter in your journey." 3 days later, Sarah stood in the dusty main street of Silverdale, watching as Harrison Wells was escorted from his bank by army personnel. The prominent banker's face reflected shock and outrage as he caught sight of her, the supposedly dead witness whose testimony had unraveled his carefully constructed narrative. Captain Davis had moved with surprising swiftness once they reached town. Sarah's detailed knowledge of the wagon train's composition and journey had convinced him to confront Wells directly. Faced with her irrefutable first-hand account, coupled with discrepancies in his own statement, the banker's deception had quickly crumbled. A subsequent search of his office had revealed damning evidence: correspondence with men hired to attack the wagon train, maps of Navajo territories marked with potential mining sites, and most significantly, bank documents and funds stolen from the massacred travelers. Now, as Wells was led away to face charges of conspiracy and murder, Sarah felt not triumph, but a hollow sort of vindication. Justice would be served, but it couldn't restore what she had lost. "What will you do now?" Key asked quietly, standing beside her in the capacity of official Army Scout, though they both knew his role had been far more complex. "My aunt in St. Louis has been contacted," Sarah replied. "She's sending funds for my passage east." She hesitated, before adding, "Captain Davis says I'll need to testify at the trial first." Key nodded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts to casual observers, though Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs of emotion in his eyes. "A new life awaits you there." "A return to an old one," she corrected, touching the hidden pouch that still contained Azomantwogi's medicine and Kinalda's carved mountain sheep, "but I carry the new with me." As they stood in that moment of transition, Sarah realized that her journey had come full circle. She had survived the unthinkable, been sheltered by those she had been taught to fear, and emerged with a perspective few would ever gain: the ability to see beyond the boundaries that separated peoples and cultures. The butterfly that had led her away from the wagons that fateful day had unwittingly guided her toward a profound transformation. Just as it had emerged, changed from its chrysalis, so too had Sarah Mitchell become something new, while retaining the essence of who she had always been. "Haguni Nijoni Nabahi," Key said softly. "Goodbye, beautiful warrior," as they prepared to part ways. "Not goodbye," Sarah replied in Navajo, her pronunciation perfect after weeks of practice. "Until our paths cross again." Above them, an eagle soared against the vast Arizona sky, its wings spread wide as it navigated invisible currents between earth and heaven. A fitting emblem for a child who had learned to exist between worlds, carrying the wisdom of both into whatever future awaited. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.